My son sent me one text that said, "Don't come back." I thought he hated me. But when I woke up, I had 46 missed calls, and by then, they had already low. The message came in late at night. Just as the house had finally gone quiet, I was sitting on the edge of my bed, scrolling mindlessly through my phone, when my son's name flashed on the screen. For a brief second, I felt relieved. He had been distant lately, shorter with his replies, but I told myself it was just stress. Just life. I opened the message expecting something ordinary. Instead, it was only 3 words long. "Don't come back." I stared at the screen, waiting for more to appear. A follow-up. A correction. Some explanation that would make those words make sense. Nothing came. My chest tightened in a way I hadn't felt in years, as if the air had suddenly become too heavy to breathe. I reread the message again and again, hoping I had misunderstood, hoping autocorrect had twisted something innocent into something cruel. But the words didn't change. They stayed there, sharp and final, glowing coldly in the dark. At first, I told myself he was angry. We had argued earlier that day, nothing major. Just one of those tense conversations where emotions run high and neither side feels heard. I had planned to give him space, to let things cool down, and then come back in the morning to talk it through like we always did. Families fight. Mothers and sons clash. That's normal. But this felt different. This wasn't heat of the moment frustration. This felt like a door slamming shut. I typed a reply, then deleted it. Typed again. Deleted again. Every response I imagined sounded wrong, too defensive, too desperate, too emotional. I finally sent a simple question. "What do you mean?" The message showed as delivered. No reply. Minutes passed. Then more minutes. I checked the time, telling myself he might have fallen asleep, that he'd answer in the morning. Still, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Memories started creeping in. Uninvited. His first day of school, when he refused to let go of my hand. The nights I stayed awake when he was sick, counting his breaths just to be sure he was okay. The way he used to run toward me when I came home, arms wide open, like I was the safest place in the world. How could that same child tell me not to come back? I tried calling him, straight to voicemail. I tried again, and again. No answer. A small voice in my head whispered that something wasn't right. But I pushed it away. I didn't want to be dramatic. I didn't want to assume the worst. So I told myself a story I could live with. He was upset. He needed space. And by morning, everything would be clearer. Sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, the words reappeared in my mind, glowing like a warning sign. "Don't come back." I wondered if I had failed him somehow, if I had crossed a line without realizing it. Mothers carry that weight easily. We always assume the blame first. I replayed our last conversation over and over, analyzing every word, every tone, searching for the moment where everything went wrong. Before I finally drifted off, I checked my phone one last time. No new messages, no missed calls, just those 3 words, sitting there in silence. I placed the phone face down on the nightstand, whispered a quiet prayer I hadn't planned on saying, and hoped desperately that when morning came, this message would make sense. What I didn't know was that, while I lay there trying to calm my heart, everything in my son's life was already beginning to fall apart. And everything. The night stretched on in a way that felt unnatural, as if time itself had slowed down to watch me worry. Every sound in the house seemed louder than usual: the ticking of the clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant bark of a dog outside. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my phone resting on my chest like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Each time the screen lit up from a notification that wasn't his, my heart jumped and then sank all over again. I told myself to be patient. He had asked me not to come back, and maybe that meant he needed distance, not confrontation. Still, a mother's instinct doesn't turn off just because she's told to step away. The silence felt wrong. It pressed in on me, filling the room, crawling into my thoughts. I wondered if he was lying awake too, angry or hurt, or if something else was happening that I couldn't see. I tried to distract myself by focusing on practical things. Tomorrow I would make his favorite breakfast. I would knock softly, give him space, and start with an apology, even if I wasn't sure what I was apologizing for yet. I rehearsed the words in my head, imagining his face softening, imagining us talking it through like we always had. But every hopeful thought was followed by a sharp twist of fear. What if this time was different? What if I really wasn't welcome anymore? Guilt has a way of digging up old memories when you least expect it. As the hours passed, I started thinking about all the moments I could have handled better, the times I pushed when I should have listened, the advice I gave when he just wanted understanding. I thought about how grown he was now, how much pressure he carried, and how easy it was for parents to underestimate the weight their children bear. Maybe this message was the result of years of small misunderstandings finally piling up. I checked the time again. Past midnight. Then later. I reached for my phone and typed another message. Something gentler this time. Something that made it clear I wasn't there to argue. I erased it before sending. I didn't want to make things worse. Instead, I called again. Just once. Promising myself I would stop if he didn't answer. Voicemail. His recorded voice. So familiar and suddenly so distant. Made my throat tighten. At some point, exhaustion took over. My eyes burned. My head ached. And my thoughts felt heavy and tangled. I drifted in and out of shallow sleep, waking every few minutes to check my phone, hoping for even a single word. Each time I saw nothing, a new wave of dread washed over me. The silence was no longer just uncomfortable, it felt like a warning. In the early hours of the morning, a strange sense of unease settled in my chest. It was more than worry about an argument or hurt feelings. It was the kind of fear that doesn't have a clear shape. The kind that tells you something is wrong even when you can explain why. I thought about calling someone else, asking if they had heard from him, but I didn't want to overreact or spread panic. I convinced myself to wait until sunrise. When the sky finally began to lighten, I felt no relief. Instead, my anxiety grew sharper, more focused. Morning meant answers, and I wasn't sure I was ready for them. I picked up my phone again, my fingers trembling, and stared at the empty screen. No messages, no missed calls, just the quiet aftermath of a night filled with unanswered questions. I sat there, watching the first light of day creep through the window, realizing that whatever had happened, it was bigger than a simple argument. The silence of the night had carried something heavy with it, something that hadn't reached me yet. And as the morning approached, I could feel it in my bones. This was only the calm before everything I feared finally came crashing down. I woke up with a sharp jolt, my heart racing before I even opened my eyes. For a brief moment, I forgot why my chest felt so tight, why there was a knot of fear sitting just beneath my ribs. Then I reached for my phone. The screen lit up, and my breath caught in my throat. Missed calls filled the display one after another, stacked so tightly I had to scroll to see them all. 46 missed calls, messages, voicemails, all from the same number. My son. My hands shook as I unlocked the phone, a cold wave rushing through me. Fear replaced every excuse I had made the night before. This wasn't anger. This wasn't distance. This was panic. I opened the first message, then the next, barely able to read through the blur in my eyes. His words were rushed, fragmented, desperate. Mom, please call me. I didn't mean it like that. Something happened. With every message, the weight in my chest grew heavier, as if the truth had been pressing down on him all night and had finally spilled over. I called him immediately. It rang once, twice, and then he answered. I could hear it in his breathing before he even spoke, short, uneven, like he was trying to hold himself together. When he finally said my name, his voice broke, and all the anger I thought he felt dissolved instantly. There was only fear. Raw, unfiltered fear. He tried to explain, but the words came out tangled, overlapping, as if his thoughts were racing faster than he could speak. Between sobs and pauses to catch his breath, the story began to take shape. The message he sent me the night before wasn't what it seemed. He hadn't been pushing me away. He had been trying to protect me. Something had gone wrong, terribly wrong, and he didn't want me walking into the middle of it. He thought he could handle it himself. He thought he could fix it before morning. He was wrong. As he talked, Pieces started falling into place. The tension in his voice, the sudden distance, the way he had sounded different lately, it all made sense now. While I was lying awake worrying about hurt feelings, his world was collapsing. He had been dealing with a crisis he hadn't told me about, carrying it alone out of pride, fear, or maybe shame. When it finally exploded, he panicked, and the only thing he could think to do was push me away from the fallout. He told me how the night had spiraled out of control, how one problem triggered another, how calls were made, doors were closed, and options disappeared one by one. Every time he tried to reach out, something stopped him: fear of worrying me, fear of admitting how bad things had become. By the time he realized he needed me, hours had passed, and I wasn't answering. That's when the missed calls began to pile up, each one heavier with desperation than the last. Listening to him, I felt a painful mix of emotions: relief that he was alive and on the line with me, guilt for not answering sooner, anger at myself for believing his message meant rejection instead of distress. But more than anything, I felt the ache of understanding. My son hadn't stopped needing me. He had been drowning quietly, hoping no one would notice. When he finally told me what they had lost, how quickly everything had unraveled, I had to sit down. The scale of it was hard to grasp. Things that took years to build were gone in a matter of hours. Security, stability, plans for the future swept away before the sun even rose. And in the middle of it all was my son, exhausted, terrified, and blaming himself for every piece of it. By the time the call ended, my hands were steady but my heart was heavy. The truth had arrived all at once, carried on 46 missed calls and a voice I barely recognized because it was filled with so much fear. The message that had shattered me the night before had never been about pushing me away. It had been a warning, an imperfect, desperate attempt to shield me from a disaster that had already begun. As the details sank in, the full weight of what had happened began to settle over me like a heavy fog. This wasn't a single bad decision or an unfortunate accident that could be brushed off with time. It was a chain reaction, one problem feeding into the next until everything my son and his family had worked for collapsed in on itself. Listening to him explain it felt unreal, like hearing about someone else's life rather than the people I loved. It started small, he said, the way disasters often do. A warning ignored, a deadline pushed back, a promise made in good faith that couldn't be kept when circumstances shifted. At first, he believed he could manage it. He had always been like that, determined, stubbornly independent, convinced that asking for help was a sign of weakness. So he tried to fix it quietly, telling himself that once it was resolved, no one would ever need to know how close things had come to falling apart. But the situation didn't stay small. One issue triggered another. And suddenly, there were calls from people who didn't want explanations, only results. Money that was supposed to cover one thing was pulled in another direction, leaving gaps that grew wider by the hour. Agreements that had once felt solid were suddenly fragile, dependent on timelines that were no longer possible. With every passing moment, the ground beneath them became less stable. By the time night fell, the consequences were unavoidable. The house that had felt safe and permanent just days earlier became a source of tension and fear. There were arguments, hurried conversations, and moments of stunned silence as reality set in. My son tried to hold everything together, but he was exhausted, emotionally and mentally drained from carrying the weight alone. He didn't know which problem to tackle first because all of them felt urgent. All of them felt life-altering. Then came the losses, one after another. So quickly they blurred together. The security they relied on vanished. Plans they had made with confidence were suddenly meaningless. Items that represented years of hard work and sacrifice were no longer theirs. The future they had imagined steady, predictable, safe fractured in a single night. When he spoke about it, his voice went flat, as if he hadn't fully processed it yet, as if saying the words out loud might finally make it real. What hurt the most was realizing how alone he had felt while it was happening. He believed he had failed not just himself, but everyone depending on him. That belief kept him silent when he needed support the most. He told himself that if he could just get through the night, if he could just stop the damage before morning, he could protect us from the worst of it. Instead, everything slipped through his fingers. As a mother, hearing that broke something inside me, not because of the material losses, but because of the emotional cost. My son had measured his worth by what he could provide and what he could control. And when that control disappeared, so did his sense of self. The text telling me not to come back suddenly made sense. It wasn't rejection. It was shame. He didn't want me to see him in the middle of failure, surrounded by the wreckage of a life he thought he was supposed to keep intact. By the end of his explanation, there was a long silence on the line. No more words were needed. The damage was done, and there was no rewinding time. Everything they had lost overnight was real, and the pain of it was settling in. I realized then that while they had lost things, money, stability, plans, they were also on the verge of losing something far more dangerous: hope. And as heavy as that realization was, it also made one thing painfully clear. Whatever had been destroyed could, in some form, be rebuilt. But only if my son understood that he didn't have to face the aftermath alone. The night had taken nearly everything from them, but it hadn't taken my love, my presence, or my willingness to stand beside him in the ruins. I didn't wait for permission. After everything he had told me, after hearing the exhaustion and fear in his voice, I knew staying away would only deepen the damage. The message that had stopped me the night before no longer had any power over me. A mother doesn't need an invitation when her child is breaking. I gathered my things with shaking hands and went back, my mind racing with 1,000 different fears about what I would find when I arrived. The place looked different the moment I stepped inside. It wasn't just the missing things or the quiet that felt heavier than usual. It was the atmosphere, the sense that something essential had been shaken loose. My son stood there, shoulders slumped, eyes tired and red, looking older than I had ever seen him. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he broke down. The strong front he had tried to hold onto finally collapsed, and he cried in a way that told me he had been holding it in for far too long. I held him, and in that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the losses, not the chaos, not the plans that had disappeared overnight. He kept apologizing, over and over, for the text, for the silence, for everything he believed he had done wrong. I stopped him as gently as I could and told him the truth, that I never needed him to be perfect, that I never loved him for what he could provide, and that I was there because he was my son, not because his life was intact. As the day went on, the reality of the situation became clearer. The damage couldn't be undone with a single conversation or a comforting hug. There were calls to make, decisions to face, and consequences that couldn't be avoided. But something important had changed. He wasn't facing it alone anymore. Each problem, no matter how overwhelming, felt slightly less impossible when it was shared. We talked about what had happened, slowly and honestly, without blame. He admitted how afraid he had been to let anyone see him struggle, how deeply the fear of disappointing me had shaped his decisions. I admitted how easily I had misread his silence, how quickly I had assumed the worst instead of trusting the bond we shared. In that exchange, something healed between us, something fragile but real. There were moments when the weight of what they had lost returned, pressing down on us both. Grief doesn't disappear just because hope arrives. But alongside that grief was a quiet determination. We began to talk about next steps, not in grand plans, but in small, manageable pieces. One phone call, one solution at a time, one day at a time. It wasn't about fixing everything immediately. It was about moving forward without being paralyzed by fear. By the evening, the space felt different again. Still damaged, still uncertain, but no longer empty. My son looked at me and said something that stayed with me. He thought telling me not to come back would protect me, but my coming back was the only thing that made him feel safe again. That's when I realized how close we had come to losing more than just material things. We had almost lost each other in the silence. I left that night knowing the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Rebuilding would take time, patience, and resilience. But I also knew this. Love doesn't arrive when everything is neat and under control. It shows up in the aftermath, in the mess, in the moments when pride has been stripped away. I came back too late to stop the disaster, but not too late to remind my son that no matter how much is lost, he will never lose me. If stories about family, loss, and second chances matter to you, please subscribe. Your support helps these real-life stories reach the people who need them most.